The briefing room fell silent when the photo appeared on the screen. A single bullet hole through reinforced glass, taken from a position no one should have been able to reach. The timestamp read 3:47 hours, 47 minutes before sunrise in the Hindu Kush. Three intelligence analysts had already resigned rather than explain what the satellite imagery showed. A lone figure, motionless on a ridge that didn't exist on any map, firing once, then vanishing into terrain that swallowed drones and surveillance teams alike. The shot had traveled 2,880 meters through mountain wind that changed direction every 30 seconds. It had passed through a gap in a compound wall exactly 8 inches wide. It had killed a target whose location was classified above top secret. And according to every record in the Department of Defense, the weapon that fired it was locked in an armory in Stuttgart, Germany. Colonel Marcus Reeves stared at the image until his eyes burned. 28 years in Army intelligence, and he'd never seen anything that made less sense. The compound was in Nuristan province, a place where satellite coverage was intermittent at best, deliberately so. The target had been protected by 3 separate security details, all of them elite, all of them dead now from secondary shots that came so fast the coroner initially thought they'd been hit by automatic fire. But the ballistics report was clear. Single shots, precision placement, all from the same rifle, a rifle that couldn't possibly be there. His phone buzzed, restricted number, he answered without speaking. "You're looking at the wrong records," a voice said. Female, American, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "Check the inactive roster. November 2019. Call sign Whisper." The line went dead. Reeves pulled up the personnel database with hands that had started to shake. November 2019 was 5 years ago, before the reorganization, before half the special operations files had been purged in the security review. He typed in the call sign, already knowing he wouldn't find anything, already feeling the shape of something vast and intentional moving beneath the surface of this mystery. The file that appeared was mostly redacted, but there was a photo. A woman in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back severe, eyes that looked past the camera like she was measuring distance. Her name was Cale Varden. Her service record showed 3 tour, expert marksman qualification, honorable discharge. Nothing that explained why her file was tagged with a classification level he'd only seen twice in his entire career. Nothing that explained why someone had gone to considerable trouble to make sure she didn't officially exist anymore. He zoomed in on her eyes in the photo and felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd seen that look before, in the mountains, in operators who'd gone so far into the dark places that they stopped casting shadows. His secure terminal chimed. New intelligence briefing, mandatory attendance, eyes-only classification. The subject line read simply, Nuristan Province, target acquisition. Reeves closed the file and stood. Outside his window, Fort Meade stretched under gray autumn sky, thousands of people moving through their routines, unaware that somewhere in the Hindu Kush, someone had just rewritten the rules of what was possible. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, already knowing this briefing would raise more questions than answers. Already knowing that Cale Varden, whatever she'd become, whatever she'd done, was about to become his entire world. The briefing room was smaller than usual, just 6 people, all of them senior enough to have scars that didn't show on medical records. The lights dimmed, and a map appeared, topographic lines showing terrain so hostile it had broken armies for 3,000 years. A red dot marked the compound. A blue dot marked the shooting position. The distance between them seemed impossible. "Gentlemen," the briefing officer said, and Reeves noticed she didn't correct herself to include the one female colonel in the room. "We have a problem that officially doesn't exist. 47 hours ago, high-value target Raven was eliminated in a compound we've been watching for 8 months. The shot was impossible. The shooter vanished. And every piece of evidence suggests this was done by someone we discharged 5 years ago for psychological instability." A photograph appeared. Cale Varden, younger in dress uniform, standing at attention with a row of medals that told a story of expertise and courage. Then another photo. The same woman, thinner, haunted, leaving a medical facility with papers in her hand and eyes that stared at nothing. Her discharge papers cite acute PTSD, paranoid delusions, and an incident where she claimed her spotter could see through walls, the briefing officer continued. 3 psychologists signed off. The Army was happy to let her go quietly. She took her pension and disappeared into Montana somewhere. We lost track of her completely after 2021. Until now, Reeves said quietly. Until now. The briefing officer clicked to another image, the compound before and after. Target Raven was a high-level facilitator for weapons transfers. Very careful, very protected. We'd been planning an operation for months, coordinating with 2 allied intelligence services. Someone decided not to wait. The female colonel spoke for the first time. The shot is being analyzed by our best people. The math doesn't work. Wind speed, Coriolis effect, temperature gradient. Even with perfect conditions, the probability of success is less than 2%. And that's assuming you can see the target, which you can't from that position. There's a ridgeline in the way. Unless, Reeves said slowly, you're not shooting from where we think you're shooting from. The briefing officer nodded. We sent a team to the location. Found a shooting position carved into rock that's been there for weeks, maybe months, found evidence of long-term occupation, and found something else. She clicked again. A photograph appeared, grainy but clear enough. Words carved into stone in letters 6 inches high. You taught me to hunt. Now watch me work. The room absorbed this in silence. Finally, someone spoke. Is she targeting us? We don't know what she's targeting, the briefing officer said. But in the last 47 hours, 2 more high-value targets have disappeared. Both in terrain we can't access quickly. Both in locations where a long-range shot would be theoretically possible if you didn't care about physics. Reeves leaned forward. You said she was discharged for delusions. What exactly did she claim? The briefing officer hesitated, then pulled up another file. She said her spotter, Staff Sergeant Cole Hendricks, developed an ability to see targets through obstacles after their 3rd deployment. Said he could describe rooms he'd never entered, predict enemy positions before they moved. She said he was shot 3 times protecting her position, and that she carried him 4 miles to an extraction point. That he died in her arms asking her to finish what they'd started. And the Army called it PTSD, the female colonel said flatly. The Army called it a trauma response and survivor's guilt. Hendricks was real, his death was real, the circumstances were classified but verified. What wasn't real was his supposed supernatural ability. The briefing officer paused. At least, that was the official conclusion. Reeves felt pieces clicking together in his mind. She's hunting the people who killed him. Or the people who made the operation that killed him possible. Or the people who covered it up. We're not sure yet. The briefing officer brought up a web of connections, names and faces linked by lines that suggested money and influence. What we do know is that every target so far has been connected to the same weapons network, the same network Hendricks died trying to expose. The room sat with this truth, understanding finally why they'd been brought here, why the classification was so high. This wasn't about one rogue operator. This was about someone with nothing to lose systematically dismantling an organization that had roots in places no one wanted to examine too closely. What are our orders? Reeves asked. Find her, the briefing officer said. Bring her in, and pray we get to her before she finishes whatever list she's working from. The team dispersed into individual assignments, but Reeves stayed behind, staring at the map. The 3 shooting positions formed a pattern if you knew what to look for. They were moving west, following the old supply routes through the mountains, heading toward Pakistan, heading toward the people at the top of the chain. He pulled up Cale Varden's file again, reading the parts that weren't redacted. Born in Wyoming, enlisted at 19, fast-tracked through sniper school because she had a gift for reading terrain. Partnered with Cole Hendricks on her second deployment, and they'd become one of the most effective teams in the theater. 217 confirmed eliminations, all of them verified, all of them clean. Then something changed. The reports from their last deployment were heavily redacted, but Reeves had enough clearance to read between the black lines. They'd been assigned to a joint operation, something involving high-level intelligence from multiple agencies. The operation went wrong in ways that weren't clearly explained. Hendricks was killed. Varden carried his body back and then fell apart during the debrief, making claims that got her flagged for immediate psychological evaluation. She'd been processed out within 6 months, given a medical discharge, and effectively erased from the operational record. Someone had wanted her gone. Someone had wanted her silent. And now she was speaking loudly, with a rifle that could reach out and touch targets from distances that shouldn't be possible. Reeves made a decision. He pulled out his personal phone, the one that wasn't monitored by 17 different agencies, and made a call to someone who owed him a favor. Someone who'd been in the mountains during that time, who might remember things that didn't make it into official reports. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Marcus, it's been a while. I need to know about an operation in 2019, Nuristan Province, team call signs Whisper and Phantom." There was a long pause. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Why are you asking?" "Because Whisper just resurfaced, and she's killing people with impossible shots." Another pause, longer this time. Then maybe they weren't so impossible. Hendricks' Phantom, he was different toward the end. We all saw it. Things he shouldn't have been able to know. Shots Whisper made that shouldn't have worked except he was there, calling adjustments like he could see through mountains. Command thought they were just that good. Some of us wondered if something else was happening. Like what? Like maybe spending 3 years in those mountains changes you. Like maybe there are things up there older than our wars. Indigenous people won't go near some of those valleys, Marcus. They have stories about rocks that whisper and winds that show you what's coming. We dismissed it as superstition, but Hendricks stopped dismissing it, and Varden believed him. Reeves felt something cold move through him. What happened on that last operation? Classified above my level, but I heard things. Something about the target being wrong, about intelligence that came from sources that shouldn't have existed. Hendricks apparently refused the shot, said something was watching them. Varden backed him. They were overruled, ordered to take the shot anyway. By the time they realized Hendricks was right, he was bleeding out and Varden was fighting her way through half a battalion to get him home. And then the army locked her up and called her crazy. The army did what it does when something doesn't fit in the manual. It erased the problem. I thought they'd succeeded. Reeves looked at the map again, at the pattern of shots, at the trajectory leading deeper into the mountains. She's hunting the people who gave that order. Then God help them, the voice said. Because if she's learned to do what Hendricks could do, if she can see what he saw, there's nowhere they can hide that she can't reach. The line went dead. Reeves sat in the empty briefing room, watching the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of smoke and blood. Somewhere in the Hindu Kush, Cale Varden was moving through terrain that had swallowed armies, hunting targets that thought themselves untouchable, using skills that officially didn't exist, and he was supposed to stop her. He pulled up her photo one more time, studying her face for clues to who she'd become. But all he saw was determination, cold and patient as stone. All he saw was someone who'd already died once and come back as something the manual had no entry for. His computer chimed. New intelligence. Another target down, this time in Kunar Province. Same impossible angle, same perfect shot. But this time there was something new. A witness, a local shepherd, claiming he'd seen a woman on the ridge hours before the shot, standing perfectly still, talking to empty air like someone was answering back. Reeves closed his eyes and made his decision. He wasn't going to stop her. He was going to find out what really happened in those mountains, who gave the orders that killed Cole Hendricks, and why they'd worked so hard to bury the truth. Because if Cale Varden was wrong, if this was just vengeance and madness, then she deserved to be brought in. But if she was right, if there was something real behind her impossible shots and her conversations with ghosts, then maybe the people she was hunting deserved exactly what was coming for them. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, already planning his next move. The official investigation would continue without him. He had something more important to do: find out what the army had been so desperate to hide that they'd destroyed one of their best operators to keep it secret. The mountains waited, patient and ancient, holding their secrets close. And somewhere among them, Cale Varden was rewriting the rules of what one person with a rifle and nothing left to lose could accomplish. 2 weeks later, Reeves was in Kabul unofficially, using vacation time and personal contacts to access files that officially no longer existed. The city had changed since the withdrawal, but some things remained constant. The people who moved in shadows, who knew how to find information for the right price. He met his contact in a tea house that had survived 40 years of war by being useful to everyone and loyal to no one. The man who sat across from him had aged badly, stress and fear carved into every line of his face. "You're asking about things that get people killed," he said in accented English. "Even now, even after everything, there are names that are still dangerous. I'm asking about an operation in 2019. American sniper team, bad intelligence, soldier killed. I need to know who gave the order." The contact looked around the tea house nervously, then slid a thumb drive across the table. "This doesn't exist. I never gave it to you. There are files on here that were supposed to be destroyed. Copies of copies, translated from intercepted communications. Read them somewhere safe, then destroy them." "What's on here?" "Proof that your soldier was right, proof that the intelligence was manufactured, and proof that someone very high up wanted that operation to happen, consequences be damned." The contact stood. "The woman you're looking for, the sniper, she's not crazy. She's probably the sanest person in this whole thing. She knows what was done, and she's making them pay for it." "Where is she?" "Heading west into Waziristan. There's a compound there, very protected, very secret. If she's following the chain, that's where it leads, also where it ends, because no one gets in there and comes back out." He paused at the door. "There are stories about her now among the locals. They call her the ghost who remembers. They say she talks to the dead and the dead talk back. They say she can see through mountains and shoot through walls. Superstition, maybe. But I've seen the bodies she leaves behind, and I'm not sure anymore what's superstition and what's something else." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Reeves pocketed the thumb drive and finished his tea, feeling the weight of what he'd just acquired. Evidence of crimes that touched the highest levels of command. Evidence that would destroy careers and possibly end his own life if the wrong people found out he had it. He made it back to his hotel room without incident, swept for listening devices, and plugged in the thumb drive. The files that appeared were a mix of scanned documents, transcribed conversations, and intelligence reports marked with classifications so high he wasn't supposed to know they existed. He started reading, and with each page, the picture became clearer and uglier. The operation that killed Cole Hendricks had been a setup from the start. The target was real, but the intelligence about his location was fed through channels designed to be traced back. The goal was to expose the source of the intelligence, a network inside Pakistani intelligence that was playing both sides. Hendricks and Varden were bait, expendable assets whose deaths would force the network to reveal itself. Except Hendricks had somehow known, had refused the shot, had tried to abort the mission, had been overruled by someone whose name was redacted from every document but whose rank was clear, high enough to override field commanders, high enough to sacrifice 2 soldiers for a larger goal. Hendricks had died protecting Varden's position when the ambush came, had died knowing they'd been betrayed, and Varden had fought her way out with his body, had made it back to base, had tried to tell anyone who would listen that they'd been set up. Instead, she'd been labeled unstable, her claims dismissed as trauma-induced delusions, and processed out of the army before she could make too much noise. Reeves sat back, feeling sick. The operation had worked. The network had been exposed, rolled up, and disappeared. Careers had been made on the success. Awards had been given. And 2 soldiers had been sacrificed on the altar of operational necessity, their truth buried under classifications and medical diagnoses. But Cale Varden hadn't forgotten. She'd survived, had disappeared, and had spent 5 years becoming something new, something dangerous. And now she was working her way through every person who'd been part of that decision, one impossible shot at a time. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. Some truths aren't worth dying for." He stared at the message, then at the files on his screen. He thought about his career, his pension, his life after the army. Thought about how easy it would be to delete everything, to forget what he'd learned, to let Cale Varden disappear back into the mountains and whatever justice she was pursuing. Then he thought about Cole Hendricks, dying in those mountains, betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect him. Thought about Cale Varden, labeled crazy and erased, her truth dismissed because it was inconvenient. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. If she was heading to Waziristan, she'd need help she didn't know she needed. The compound there wasn't just protected by security. It was protected by influence, by money, by connections that reached into 3 governments. One person with a rifle, no matter how skilled, wasn't going to be enough. But one person with a rifle and someone on the inside, feeding her the right intelligence, might have a chance. The calls went to people he trusted, people who'd served with honor and were tired of watching that honor get corrupted by bureaucrats and careerists. People who understood that sometimes the system needed to be reminded that there were still consequences for the worst kinds of betrayal. Within 6 hours, he had a team assembled. Not official, not sanctioned, just 7 people who were willing to burn their own careers to help a ghost get her revenge. They called themselves Task Force Phantom, a small tribute to the man whose death had started all of this. Their mission: track Cale Varden, keep her alive, and make sure that when she took her final shot, the right people understood exactly why they were dying. 3 days later, Reeves was in Peshawar with documents he shouldn't have, and plans that would get him court-martialed if discovered. His team was scattered across the region, watching, listening, gathering intelligence. And somewhere ahead of them, moving through the tribal areas like a rumor made flesh, Cale Varden was closing in on her final targets. The first indication they were on the right track came from a Pakistani intelligence officer who'd been paid to watch certain routes. There was a woman, he reported, traveling alone through the Khyber Pass. Very unusual. She moved like a soldier but dressed like a local, asked questions about a compound in North Waziristan, paid in American dollars, old bills unmarked. When? 3 days ago, she was heading toward Muransha. There's a compound there, very protected. The man who owns it, he has connections that go very high. He facilitates things, arranges things, makes problems disappear. If someone wants to find him, they either have very good reasons or very bad intentions. Reeves looked at the map, calculating distances and approaches. Can you get us to the area without being noticed? The officer smiled without humor. I can get you close. After that, you're in the tribal areas. Different rules apply. If you die there, no one will ever find your body. We'll take that risk. They moved at night, 4 vehicles traveling roads that barely existed, past villages where children stared with old eyes and men watched from doorways with rifles older than their grandfathers. The tribal areas were like nowhere else Reeves had ever been, beautiful and hostile in equal measure, a place where time moved differently, and outsiders were tolerated only as long as they were useful. The compound came into view at dawn, sprawling across a hillside like a fortress. High walls, guard towers, security that looked professional and well-equipped. Intel suggested 30 men on site, all of them experienced, all of them loyal. The kind of place that could hold off a company-sized assault for days. The kind of place that one sniper with impossible skills might be able to penetrate if she didn't care about getting back out. Reeves set up his observation post on a ridge 2 kilometers away, glassing the compound through high-powered optics, looking for any sign of Cale Varden, any indication that she was already in position. The terrain was brutal, steep valleys, rocky ridges, few approaches that didn't leave you exposed. Whoever owned this compound had chosen well. His radio crackled, one of his team positioned on the northern approach. "Colonel, you need to see this." He moved carefully, staying below the ridgeline, until he reached the other observation point. His team member handed him the spotting scope without speaking, just pointed toward a rock formation 3 kilometers from the compound. Reeves looked, adjusted focus, and felt his breath catch. There, carved into the rock face in letters visible from kilometers away, was a message. HENDRICKS sends his REGARDS. "She's announcing herself," the team member said quietly, "letting them know she's coming. Or letting them know she's already here." Reeves swept the scope across the terrain, looking for shooting positions, for signs of occupation. Found nothing. Cale Varden had learned to move through these mountains like she was part of them, to disappear in terrain that should offer no concealment. 5 years of hunting had taught her to become invisible. His radio crackled again. "Different team member, eastern position. Movement in the compound. They've seen the message. Security's doubling up, bringing in reinforcements. Looks like they're preparing for an assault." Reeves watched the compound come alive, men moving with military precision to defensive positions. They were treating this seriously, which meant they knew who was coming, meant they'd been expecting her or fearing her. The question was whether they understood what they were really up against. As the sun climbed higher, the heat came with it, turning the valley into a furnace. Reeves and his team waited, watching, ready to provide support if needed, but hoping it wouldn't come to that. This was Cale's operation, her justice, her hunt. They were just there to make sure it didn't cost her life in the process. Hours passed. The compound remained alert, security teams rotating but never relaxing. Whoever was inside understood the threat, had prepared for it. Reeves began to wonder if maybe Cale had bitten off more than she could handle, if maybe this time the protection was too good, the defenses too strong. Then, at 13:47 hours, a single shot rang out across the valley. The sound echoed off the mountains, making it impossible to tell where it originated. In the compound, a guard in the main tower collapsed, his rifle clattering down stone steps. Before anyone could react, a second shot. Another guard down, this one at the gate. Then a third, a fourth, each shot so precisely timed that the security team couldn't coordinate a response. They were taking fire from somewhere, but no one could determine where. And by the time they'd locked down into defensive positions, 6 men were dead. Reeves swept his optics across the terrain, trying to find the shooting position. Impossible angles, impossible distances, shots that came from directions that didn't make tactical sense. It was like watching a ghost work, invisible and unstoppable, turning the compound's defenses against itself. His radio crackled. His sniper, the best long-range shooter in the team, spoke with something like awe in his voice. "Colonel, I found her position, or what I think is her position, but it doesn't make sense. She's shooting from behind solid rock. There's no line of sight to the compound from where she is. It's impossible." "Show me." He moved to the sniper's position, looked through the scope at the coordinates being called out. There, in a shallow depression carved into stone, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a shooting position. And there, barely visible, was Cale Varden. She was alone. That was the first thing that struck him. Completely alone, working her rifle with movements so practiced they were almost mechanical. But she was looking at something beside her, turning her head occasionally like she was listening to someone speak. And the position she'd chosen had no direct line of sight to the compound. There was a massive rock formation in the way. "How is she making those shots?" the sniper whispered. Reeves watched as Kale adjusted her position, aimed at an angle that made no sense, and fired. 3 seconds later, his radio crackled with confirmation. Another guard down in the compound. Impossible shot through a gap that shouldn't exist. "She's bouncing rounds," Reeves said slowly, not quite believing it himself. "Shooting at angles, using the terrain to redirect the bullets. Or she can see through mountains," the sniper finished. "Like her spotter could, like the report said." They watched her work for another hour, taking measured shots, each one finding its target despite the impossible geometry of the terrain. The compound's security was in chaos, men too terrified to show themselves, pinned down by fire that came from nowhere and everywhere. And through it all, Cale Varden remained calm, methodical, occasionally pausing to look to her left as if checking with someone who wasn't there. Finally, the compound's main building opened and a man emerged, hands raised, white cloth tied to a stick. Surrender. The security team had broken, unwilling to die for someone who couldn't protect them from an invisible shooter. Cale's next shot wasn't at the man with the white flag. It was at the building behind him, at a window on the third floor where someone was watching. The glass exploded and Reeves saw a figure fall back into shadow. A moment later, the building erupted in chaos, men fleeing, and the man with the white flag dropped it and ran. "She got him," the sniper said. "Whoever she came for, she got him." Reeves kept his optics on Cale's position, watching as she slowly broke down her shooting setup, moving with practiced efficiency. Then she stood, shouldered her pack, and looked directly at their observation post. For a moment, her eyes seemed to lock onto his through 3 kilometers of space, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. She nodded once, a small gesture that might have been acknowledgement or might have been thanks, then turned and walked into the mountains, disappearing like she'd never been there at all. "Do we follow her?" someone asked on the radio. Reeves lowered his optics and considered. They'd come here to help if needed, to bear witness to justice that the official system couldn't provide. But Cale Varden didn't need their help. She was beyond their help now, operating in a space between the possible and the impossible, guided by skills that couldn't be taught and instincts that came from somewhere outside the manual. "No," he said finally. "Let her go. We'll verify the targets down, then extract. Our mission here is finished." They moved carefully toward the compound, finding it abandoned except for the dead and dying. The man Cale had shot through the third-floor window was Rashid Mansour, a facilitator whose network had been responsible for weapons transfers that killed hundreds. He'd also been the source of the false intelligence that led to Cole Hendrick's death, a fact that was in the classified files but never pursued because Mansour was too valuable as an asset. Not anymore. Now he was just another casualty in a war that officially didn't exist, killed by an operator who officially wasn't supposed to be there. Reeves found a sat phone in Mansour's office, still active, recent calls to numbers in 3 countries. He downloaded the call log, knowing it would lead to more names, more targets, more people who'd thought themselves untouchable. He'd pass this information along through channels that wouldn't lead back to him, let other people decide what to do with it. But part of him hoped that somewhere in those mountains, Cale Varden would get to them first. They extracted quietly, leaving the compound to be found by local authorities who would have no explanation for what happened beyond armed confrontation, unknown parties. The tribal areas swallowed secrets like this regularly. One more wouldn't make a difference. Back in Peshawar, Reeves filed a report that contained mostly truths and a few necessary lies. He'd been investigating the death of Cole Hendricks, had tracked leads to Pakistan, had discovered evidence of intelligence manipulation. The compound attack was carried out by unknown parties, possibly local militants settling scores. He had no information about Cale Varden's whereabouts. The report was accepted without comment, filed away in classifications that would keep it hidden for 50 years. Reeves knew he'd pushed his luck as far as it would go. Any further investigation would draw attention he couldn't afford. But he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. He'd found the truth about what happened to Cole Hendricks, and he'd made sure that someone remembered. He'd borne witness to Cale Varden's hunt, and by not stopping her, had become complicit in her justice. He could live with that. Back at Fort Meade, he was called into a meeting with people whose names he didn't know and whose faces he wouldn't remember. They asked him questions about Pakistan, about the dead facilitator, about rumors of an American sniper working in the tribal areas. He answered carefully, giving them nothing they could use, protecting what little he knew about Cale's movements. Finally, one of them leaned forward. "Colonel Reeves, let me be clear. If you have information about a rogue American operator conducting unauthorized killings in a foreign country, you are obligated to report it. The consequences for not doing so would be severe." "I understand," Reeves said. "If I had such information, I would report it. I don't." They stared at him, trying to determine if he was lying. He stared back, his face revealing nothing, 28 years of service giving him the credibility to sell the lie. Eventually, they dismissed him, but he knew he'd be watched now, that every communication would be monitored, every movement tracked. He'd crossed a line by choosing to protect Cale Varden, and there would be consequences for that choice. He accepted it. Some truths were worth protecting, even if it cost him everything. 6 months passed. Reeves heard nothing about Cale Varden, no reports of impossible shots or dead facilitators. Either she'd finished her hunt, or she'd gone so deep underground that even the intelligence community couldn't find her. He preferred to think it was the former, that she'd found peace somehow, that Cole Hendricks' ghost could finally rest. Then one morning he found a package on his desk. No return address, no postmark, just a simple box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photograph, 2 people in military gear, smiling at the camera with mountains behind them. Cale Varden and Cole Hendricks, young and alive, before the betrayal, before the death, before everything went wrong. On the back, in handwriting he'd never seen but somehow recognized, were 4 words: "Thank you for remembering." He kept the photograph, locked in a drawer where no one would find it. A reminder that justice sometimes came from unexpected places, that the system didn't have a monopoly on righteousness, and that some ghosts were worth believing in. Years later, when he was retired and the classifications had faded from his life, Reeves would sometimes pull out that photograph and wonder what happened to Cale Varden. Whether she'd found peace or just kept hunting. Whether the skills that made her impossible to stop had eventually consumed her, or whether she'd learned to live with them. He never found out. But sometimes, late at night when the news reported another unexplained death in some distant conflict zone, another target eliminated by an invisible shooter, he'd smile and think, maybe she's still out there, still working, still remembering, still making sure that betrayal has consequences and that the dead are not forgotten. The legend grew over time, as legends do. Stories from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Syria and Yemen, and a dozen other places where wars simmered beneath international attention. Stories of an American woman who moved through the mountains like smoke, who talked to ghosts and saw through walls, who took shots that shouldn't be possible and hit targets that shouldn't be reachable. The locals called her different names in different places. The ghost who remembers, the widow of the mountains, Whisper. Always she was described the same way, alone but not alone, working her rifle with movements too perfect to be entirely human, occasionally pausing to consult with someone no one else could see. Intelligence agencies tracked the stories but found no evidence. No bodies with American weapons, no brass left behind, no DNA, No fingerprints, no proof that anyone had been there at all. Just dead targets and rumors and the occasional message carved in stone. Hendricks sends his regards. Eventually, even the stories faded. New conflicts drew attention. New threats emerged. The world moved on, forgetting the ghost in the mountains, forgetting the hunt that had consumed 5 years and left a trail of carefully chosen bodies across half a dozen countries. But in certain circles, among certain people, the name Cale Varden was remembered, spoken quietly by those who'd served with her, by those who'd investigated her, by those who'd tried to stop her and failed. She'd become something more than human in the telling, a force of nature, a manifestation of consequences, a reminder that some debts eventually come due. And somewhere in mountains that had swallowed armies and secrets and the bones of empires, maybe she was still there, still hunting, still working, still making sure that Cole Hendricks was remembered and that his death wasn't in vain.